Blood is notoriously difficult to wash out of white surfaces. Most people assume hot water and soap will do the trick, but heat only sets the stain permanently. You need cold water, you need hydrogen peroxide, and above all, you need a meticulous, almost clinical patience. I learned this long before I put on the baggy blue uniform of a night shift cleaner at St. Jude Hospital. Back then, they called me the ghost of the Blackwood Syndicate. Now, I am just Asher, an exhausted, underpaid Omega with cracked knuckles, desperately trying to scrub the phantom smell of copper and gunpowder out of my life. The industrial bleach burns my skin, but I welcome the sting. If the floors are spotless, my mind stays quiet. I wrung out the mop, the dirty water splashing into the yellow bucket, and cast a worried glance toward the corner of the dim hospital suite. Toby was huddled under a thin thermal blanket, his small face flushed with a dangerous fever. He was not my biological son. He was the ghost of a hit I could not bring myself to finish. The child who had broken the Blackwood's greatest assassin and turned him into a terrified, overprotective father. Tonight, his fever had spiked so high, I had no choice but to sneak him into the safest, warmest place in the hospital. Room 804. The VIP suite belonged to Julian Thorne, the Iron Alpha, the undisputed ruler of the Thorne family underworld in New York. For 3 weeks, he had been lying in that bed, trapped in a coma after a betrayal from his own second-in-command, Marcus Kane. The doctors said his brain activity was a fading whisper. But to me, he was just a quiet roommate who did not complain when I talked to myself or when I brought a sick toddler into his sterile sanctuary. I sighed, adjusting the cold compress on Toby's forehead. "Just hang in there, buddy." I whispered, my voice rough. Then the electronic lock on the door clicked. It was not the soft, measured entry of a night nurse. It was heavy, deliberate, and entirely wrong. The thick oak door pushed open and 3 men slipped into the room. They wore dark tactical jackets, their hands wrapped around suppressed handguns. Marcus's men. They had finally come to finish the job. Panic is a luxury a former assassin cannot afford, but my heart slammed against my ribs anyway. Not because I was afraid of them. I could neutralize all 3 in under 20 seconds using nothing but the aluminum handle of my mop. I was panicked because a firefight would bring the police expose my fake identity and put Toby right in the crossfire. But then the man in the lead took a step forward. He stepped right onto the pristine, freshly sterilized floor I had just spent 45 minutes scrubbing. He left a thick, wet footprint of gray New York slush on the white linoleum. A muscle in my jaw twitched. "Are you kidding me?" I thought, my grip tightening on the mop handle. "I just cleaned that." The lead hitman did not even notice me cowering in the shadows. He approached the bed, raising his weapon toward Julian's motionless head. "Time to sleep forever, boss," he sneered. Before his finger could even brush the trigger, the heart monitor beside the bed let out a sharp, erratic shriek. A pale, muscular hand shot out from beneath the white sheets, moving with blinding, terrifying speed. Julian's fingers clamped around the hitman's wrist. A sickening cracking sound echoed through the room as bone splintered. The assassin screamed, dropping the gun. Julian Thorne's eyes snapped open. They were not the confused, hazy eyes of a man waking from a 3-week coma. They were the eyes of a predator. Instantly, the air in the room plummeted in temperature. An overwhelming surge of alpha pheromones flooded the space, a biting, suffocating winter frost. It was so intense it made the remaining 2 gunmen stagger backward, clutching their throats as their instincts screamed at them to submit. Julian did not hesitate. Ignoring the IV lines tearing from his arms, he ripped the lead hitman forward and drove a brutal fist into his throat, silencing him instantly. The Alpha moved like a force of nature, driven by pure lethal instinct. The second hitman panicked and aimed wildly. His gun swung in my direction. Julian's head snapped toward me. His winter scent darkened into something fiercely territorial. "No!" He snarled a sound that vibrated deep in his chest. He lunged across the room, placing his massive frame entirely between me and the weapon. I realized with a jolt of absolute shock that he was protecting me. The hitman fired. Julian dodged the brunt of it, grabbing the man's jacket to hurl him violently into the wall. The third man rushed forward from the flank. My muscle memory kicked in. Without thinking, I shifted my weight, ready to deliver a fatal strike to his trachea. But I stopped myself just in time. I am an Omega cleaner. I am terrified, I reminded myself. Instead of striking, I let out a pathetic high-pitched gasp and faked a clumsy stumble backward. As I fell, I perfectly angled the handle of my mop, sweeping it right between the third hitman's legs. He tripped hard, face-planting into the edge of the metal bedside table with a hollow crunch. He did not get up. Julian finished the second man with a ruthless knee to the ribs, leaving all three attackers unconscious or dead on my ruined floor. Silence descended, broken only by the frantic beeping of the torn medical machines and Toby's soft whimpers from the corner. Julian stood amidst the wreckage, his broad chest heaving, his dark eyes scanning the room. The terrifying winter storm of his pheromones was still suffocating, making my hands shake for real. Then his sharp gaze landed on me. He inhaled deeply, catching the scent of my black coffee pheromones. Most alphas hated my scent, calling it bitter and flat. But Julian's tense shoulders slowly dropped. The killing intent in his eyes dissolved, replaced by a strange, bewildered softness. He looked at me, huddled on the floor, in a cheap apron, clutching a broken mop, trembling, and saw exactly what I wanted him to see: a helpless, fragile creature. I looked up at him, calculating my next move. I could grab Toby, knock the weakened alpha out, and disappear into the New York night. It was the smart choice, the safe choice. But outside it was freezing. Toby was burning up. The Blackwood Syndicate was still looking for me, and I was dead broke. I looked at the Iron Alpha, a man who had just used his recovering body as a human shield for a janitor he had never officially met. Sorry, Julian, I thought letting a single perfectly timed tear roll down my cheek. I'm going to have to use you. Please. I whispered, my voice trembling flawlessly. Do not hurt us. To a normal person, Julian Thorne's penthouse on the 65th floor overlooking Central Park was a fortress in the sky. To the former top assassin of the Blackwood Syndicate, it was a Swiss cheese of tactical blind spots. I spent my first 2 days in the Manhattan apartment playing the role of the terrified, fragile Omega. It was not entirely an act. I was genuinely terrified of my cover being blown. Toby was finally safe. His fever had broken the morning after the hospital incident, thanks to a private concierge doctor Julian had summoned to the penthouse. Currently, my little boy was fast asleep in a guest bedroom that was easily 3 times the size of our old drafty apartment in Queens, clutching a ridiculously expensive stuffed bear Julian's men had bought for him. With Toby recovering, I had time to observe my new environment and my new protector. Julian was suffering. The bullet fragments that had put him in a coma had left him with severe neurological trauma, specifically wreaking havoc on his pheromone regulation. As an Iron Alpha, his presence was naturally imposing, but now it was wildly out of control. His winter frost scent constantly leaked into the air, transforming the penthouse into an invisible, suffocating tundra. His own men, hardened Mafia enforcers in tailored suits, could barely stand to be in the same room as him for more than 5 minutes without their instincts screaming at them to submit or flee. I watched him from the kitchen island as I chopped vegetables for a soup. He sat at the massive oak dining table, his head buried in his hands, massaging his temples, while a stack of syndicate reports sat ignored in front of him. His jaw was clenched so tight, I thought his teeth might shatter. The air around him was bitterly cold, heavy with pain and suppressed rage. And then there was my scent. Black coffee. In the Omega hierarchy, my scent was considered a genetic misstep. It was harsh, bitter, and lacked the sweet floral notes that alphas instinctively craved. Traffickers and underground brokers had always overlooked me because I did not smell soft. But as I watched Julian suffer, my own stress flared. Not because I felt sorry for him, though annoyingly a small part of me did, but because one of his idiot guards had left the balcony door unlocked and my assassin instincts were screaming at the security breach. My bitter coffee scent spiked, cutting through the freezing air of the apartment. Instantly, Julian froze. He slowly lifted his head from his hands. I tensed, grabbing the kitchen knife a little tighter, preparing for him to snap at me to suppress my harsh scent. Instead, he inhaled deeply. His shoulders, which had been locked in rigid agony for 2 days, slowly dropped. The suffocating winter storm in the room melted into a quiet, crisp autumn chill. The dark, roasted bitterness of my pheromones acted like a chemical anchor, perfectly neutralizing the chaotic frost of his alpha distress. He looked at me across the room, his dark eyes wide with a quiet, stunned relief. He breathed me in like I was a painkiller. I quickly looked down, pretending to be intimidated by his stare, and went back to aggressively chopping carrots. Great, I thought bitterly. Not only am I his charity case now, I am his walking ibuprofen. By 2 o'clock that night, I could not take the anxiety anymore. Julian's security team was a joke. They had placed a laser tripwire near the private elevator lobby, but the angle was entirely wrong. A blindfolded rookie with a limp could vault over it without triggering the alarm. Making sure Julian was asleep, I slipped out of my bedroom wearing oversized sweatpants and a thin t-shirt. I crept down the darkened hallway, making absolutely zero noise, a habit ingrained in my bones. I crouched beside the elevator door, pulling a stolen butter knife from my pocket. With a few quick, silent twists, I unscrewed the casing of the laser sensor and began recalibrating the internal mirror angle so it would cover the floor-to-ceiling blind spot. Amateurs, I muttered under my breath, adjusting a wire. If Marcus Kane sends a real strike team through the vents, we will be dead before the coffee machine finishes brewing. "What are you doing?" The voice was deep gravelly and right behind me. My heart genuinely stopped. Not because I was scared of him, but because he had moved so quietly, I had not heard him approach. He really is the Iron Alpha, I realized with a flash of professional respect. I dropped the butter knife with a perfectly pitched squeak of terror and spun around, pressing my back against the wall. Julian stood in the shadows wearing sweatpants and a dark t-shirt that clung to his broad chest. His winter scent flared, but the moment my coffee scent spiked in panic, his aura instantly softened, wrapping around me to soothe rather than intimidate. I immediately dropped my gaze to the floor, wrapping my arms around myself to look as small as possible. I couldn't sleep, I stammered, my voice trembling. The little red light on the wall was blinking. It scared me. I was just trying to turn it off. Julian did not look at the tripwire I had just effectively turned from a useless toy into a highly lethal alarm system. He looked at me. He took a slow step forward, mindful not to crowd me. Gently, with a tenderness that completely contradicted the brutal violence I had seen him unleash in the hospital, he reached out and took my hands. I froze. Julian pulled my hands up to the dim emergency lighting. He traced the faded white lines across my knuckles, my palms, and the base of my wrists, scars from knife fights, garrote wire burns, and shattered glass from a botched assassination in Vienna. "Your hands," he murmured, his voice thick with a sudden dark emotion. "Who did this to you, Asher?" I swallowed hard, desperately calculating my lie. "Chemicals," I whispered, keeping my eyes wide and watery. "Industrial bleach at the hospital, broken glass from mopping up accidents. Just cleaning." Julian's eyes darkened. A terrifying, possessive storm brewed in his irises. His thumb brushed over a jagged scar I had gotten from killing a Russian mob boss 3 years ago. "No one will ever make you bleed for a paycheck again," he vowed. The absolute, unwavering certainty in his voice sent a strange shiver down my spine. He lifted my scarred hands and pressed a remarkably gentle kiss to my battered knuckles. "I will tear down anyone who tries to make you hold a mop or a bucket in fear. You are safe here." I looked up into the face of the most dangerous man in New York, a man swearing a blood oath to protect me from the very life I used to rule. My chest tightened with something that felt dangerously uncomfortably like guilt. "Oh, Julian," I thought, letting a soft, fake sob escape my lips as he pulled me into his warm chest. "If you only knew that the hands you are kissing have buried more men than your entire syndicate." There is a very specific rhythm to scrubbing a countertop. Press circle, swipe, breathe. Press circle, swipe, breathe. If you focus entirely on the repetitive motion, the abrasive sound of the sponge against the imported Italian marble, you do not have to hear the echoes of the past. It was 3:15 in the morning on a Tuesday, our second week, living in the sky-high fortress of the Thorn Syndicate. The penthouse was dead silent, save for the hum of the city far below. I was standing in the sprawling state of the art kitchen, violently scrubbing a counter that was already immaculate. I had used antibacterial spray, then dish soap, and finally a heavy splash of raw bleach. My hands were raw, the skin peeling slightly at the edges of my knuckles, but I could not stop. Earlier that evening, one of Julian's men had returned from a collection run. He had stood in the foyer to give his report, and I had caught the faint metallic scent of fresh blood clinging to the hem of his tailored coat. It was a minuscule detail. A normal Omega would not have even noticed it beneath the heavy cologne the Enforcer wore. But I was not a normal Omega. That single microscopic drop of blood had triggered a visceral cascade of memories: the damp basement in Brooklyn, the suppressed cough of a silencer, the wet thud of a body hitting the floor. So I cleaned, because if the penthouse smelled like bleach and lemon, it could not smell like death. "You are going to strip the polish right off the stone." I flinched, the sponge slipping from my harsh grip. Julian was leaning against the arched doorway of the kitchen. He was dressed in loose sweatpants and a dark Henley, unbuttoned at the collar, holding a crystal glass with 2 fingers of amber whiskey. His iron alpha presence was naturally imposing, but the winter frost of his pheromones was subdued, heavily muted by the lingering scent of the bitter black coffee I had brewed hours ago. It was sticky. I lied, my voice dropping into the soft, nervous cadence I had perfected for him. I reached for a towel to dry my shaking hands, avoiding his eyes. I just wanted to make sure it was clean. Julian did not mock me. He did not point out that I had been scrubbing the same 2 square feet for 40 minutes. Instead, he set his glass down on the island and walked slowly toward me. He reached out and gently took the chemical-soaked sponge out of my hand, tossing it into the sink. Then he took the towel and began drying my hands himself. His massive, calloused fingers were incredibly gentle as they patted the raw red skin of my palms. "Here, it is not just a habit, is it?" Julian asked quietly. His dark eyes searched my face, seeing right through the fragile Omega act straight to the damaged core beneath. "When you clean like this, Asher, you look like you are trying to scrub something out of your own mind." My breath caught. I stared at his broad chest, suddenly feeling terribly exposed. For a man who solved most of his problems with bullets and intimidation, Julian possessed a terrifying emotional intuition. "I do not like messes." I whispered the truest thing I had said to him since we met. Julian's thumb brushed lightly over my wrist. "Neither do I," he murmured. He let go of my hands and picked up his whiskey. He took a slow sip, his gaze drifting toward the floor to ceiling windows that showcased the glittering, jagged skyline of New York. "I have made a lot of messes in my life, Asher, things that no amount of bleach will ever wash away." I leaned back against the counter, wrapping my arms around my chest. "You are the head of the Thorn Syndicate. Making messes is in your job description. It should not be." Julian said, the exhaustion in his voice heavy and raw. "When I took over from my father, I thought I could control the violence. I thought I could use fear like a scalpel-precise, necessary surgical. But fear is a disease. It spreads. It infected Marcus. It infected the men who came for me in that hospital room." He turned his head to look at me, the amber lighting casting long shadows across his sharp jawline. "I built an empire on a graveyard, and I told myself it was for the greater good. But seeing Toby terrified in that hospital, it made me realize exactly what kind of monster I have become." My chest tightened painfully. He was standing there, the dreaded Iron Alpha confessing his deepest sins to me, seeking absolution from a creature he believed to be pure. If he only knew. Suddenly, a sharp, terrified cry shattered the quiet intimacy of the kitchen. "Daddy." I moved before the conscious thought even registered. I bolted out of the kitchen and sprinted down the hallway, Julian right on my heels. I threw open the door to the guest bedroom. Toby was sitting up in the massive bed, tangled in the silk sheets, his face flushed and covered in tears. Hey, I am here!" I hushed, sliding onto the mattress and pulling his small, trembling body into my chest. "I am right here, Toby. You are safe." The loud noise. Toby sobbed into my collarbone, his tiny fists clutching my t-shirt. The loud noise in the dark. I closed my eyes, resting my chin on top of his soft hair. The loud noise. I knew exactly what nightmare he was having. It was not a dream, it was a memory. Toby was not my son, he was my assignment. A year and a half ago, the Blackwood Syndicate had ordered me to eliminate a mid-level accountant who had embezzled their funds along with his entire family to send a message. I was the ghost. I never left witnesses. I had bypassed their security, disabled the cameras, and executed the accountant and his wife with 2 suppressed shots. Quick, clean, professional. But then I heard the whimper from the crib in the corner of the room. I had walked over, my weapon raised, ready to complete the contract. I looked down into the crib and saw a terrified, wide-eyed toddler clutching a stuffed rabbit. He had looked up at the man dressed in shadows, the man who had just painted his nursery walls with blood, and he had not screamed. He had just reached his tiny, trembling hands up toward me. In that split second, the ghost died. I lowered my gun. I triggered the fire alarm to cover my tracks, wrapped the boy in a blanket, and vanished into the night. I betrayed my syndicate, forfeited my millions in offshore accounts, and faked my own death, all to become a broke, exhausted hospital cleaner trying to buy black market fever reducers. I held Toby tighter, rocking him back and forth until his sobs turned into quiet hiccups. "There are no loud noises here, sweetie. I whispered fiercely. "I will not let anything bad ever touch you. I promise." When Toby finally drifted back to sleep, I carefully untangled myself and stepped out into the hallway. Julian was waiting there. He had watched the entire exchange from the doorway. His expression was completely unreadable, a stormy mix of awe and deep protective yearning. "You are a good father," Julian said softly. I looked down, feeling the suffocating weight of my own hypocrisy. "I do my best." Julian closed the distance between us in 2 long strides. He stood so close I could feel the heat radiating from his skin. The winter frost of his pheromones wrapped around my bitter coffee scent, creating a strange, intoxicating blend that smelled like a crisp autumn morning. He reached out his hand, gently cupping my jaw. His thumb traced the curve of my cheekbone. "You are constantly taking care of him," Julian whispered, his voice dropping an octave, rich and magnetic. "Who takes care of you, Asher?" I could not breathe. The raw vulnerability in his eyes was blinding. I was a master of manipulation, trained to use emotions as weapons, but under his gaze, all my defenses crumbled to dust. Julian tilted my chin up. He did not rush. He gave me every opportunity to pull away to play the frightened Omega and run back to my room, but my feet felt rooted to the expensive hardwood floor. Slowly, tenderly, Julian lowered his head and pressed his lips to mine. It was not a demanding kiss. It was devastatingly gentle. It was a question and offering a silent vow of protection. I closed my eyes and let my lips part, returning the pressure, letting myself drown in the illusion of safety for just one fleeting moment. His hand slid to the back of my neck, anchoring me while my hands tentatively rested against his solid chest. It was perfect, warm, sweet, and incredibly safe, and it terrified me to my very core. When he finally pulled away, resting his forehead against mine, I kept my eyes closed because I knew if I looked at him, I would shatter. He is falling in love with a ghost. I thought, my heart twisting in a violent knot of guilt and dread. He thinks these hands are meant to hold children and wash dishes. If he knew how many bodies I have buried, if he knew who I really was, this gentle kiss would turn into a bullet right between my eyes. There is a terrifying vulnerability in watching a titan fall. It does not happen all at once with a dramatic crash. It happens in agonizingly slow increments, a quiet crumbling of stone that forces you to watch the ruin unfold, powerless to stop it. The doctors at the hospital had warned us about the neurological backslide. The bullet fragments resting perilously close to Julian's spine were unpredictable. For 2 weeks, the Iron Alpha had been an impenetrable wall of strength, healing faster than medically possible. But on Thursday night, his body finally demanded payment for the trauma it had endured. It started with a tremor in his hands. By midnight, it had escalated into a severe microseizure, followed by a spiking fever that left him entirely bedridden. His normally dominant winter frost scent had fractured, smelling like cracked ice and desperation. I sat beside him in the master bedroom, wiping his burning forehead with a damp cloth. Toby was asleep in my lap, his small chest rising and falling rhythmically. Julian lay against the pillows, his breathing shallow, his dark eyes clouded with pain. "You should take him and go." Julian rasped, his voice barely a whisper. His massive hand weakly gripped my wrist, stopping the damp cloth. "If Marcus knows I am weak, he will come. I cannot let you be caught in the crossfire, Asher, please." I looked down at him, my heart performing a complicated, painful rhythm in my chest. This man who commanded the most feared syndicate in New York was lying in his own sweat, and his only concern was the safety of a hospital cleaner he had met 3 weeks ago. "I am not leaving you," I said quietly, the truth slipping out before I could filter it. "Just rest." Julian's eyes fluttered shut, his grip on my wrist loosening as exhaustion dragged him under. I sat there in the dim light, the heavy silence of the penthouse pressing against my eardrums. Then the silence broke. It was not an alarm. It was the distinct high-frequency hum of a localized EMP detonating. Instantly, every light in the penthouse died. The hum of the air conditioning ceased. The biometric locks on the reinforced doors disengaged with a sickening hollow click. My blood ran cold. The Blackwood Syndicate preferred quiet assassinations. Marcus Kane's men, however, preferred brute force. I carefully lifted Toby, hiding him inside the reinforced walk-in closet, wrapping him in heavy coats. "Do not make a sound, Toby," I whispered urgently into the dark. "Close your eyes and cover your ears. No matter what you hear, do not come out." I stepped back into the bedroom just as the front doors of the penthouse were blown off their hinges. The explosion shook the floorboards. Julian jolted awake, adrenaline temporarily overriding his neurological collapse. He stumbled out of bed, his face pale sweat dripping from his jaw. He did not reach for his gun on the nightstand. Instead, he lunged toward me, grabbing my shoulders and shoving me forcefully behind his broad back, pinning me against the wall near the closet door. "Stay behind me," Julian growled. His winter pheromones exploded into the room, a desperate, suffocating blizzard meant to intimidate, but I could smell the physical agony it cost him to project it. Heavy tactical boots pounded down the hallway. Flashlights pierced the darkness. 5 men entered the master bedroom. These were not the cheap thugs from the hospital. These were elite mercenaries clad in Kevlar, armed with suppressed submachine guns and tactical knives. Well, well. The lead mercenary chuckled, the beam of his flashlight hitting Julian's trembling frame. "Marcus sends his regards, boss. Look at you. You can barely stand. And you brought a pet Omega to the slaughter." Julian let out a guttural snarl, stepping forward to shield me entirely. "If you touch him, I will tear your heart out through your ribs." The mercenary laughed. He raised his weapon. Julian tensed, preparing to throw his failing body directly into the line of fire to buy me a fraction of a second to run. He was going to die. Right here, on the imported Persian rug, the Iron Alpha was going to die for a lie. He was going to die for a fragile Omega who did not exist. I looked at Julian's broad back. I looked at the way his shoulders shook from the fever. I thought about the gentle kiss in the kitchen, the way he had kissed my scarred knuckles, the way his winter scent always softened for me. No, I thought an icy, familiar calm washing over my brain, shutting down the fear and locking away the empathy. "You are not allowed to die for me." In the corner of the room, leaning against the wall, was the heavy-duty industrial cleaning cart I had forced his men to buy for me. Resting inside it was an anodized aluminum mop handle. Solid, lightweight, unbreakable, the mercenary's finger tightened on the trigger. I did not scream. I did not cower. I moved. I grabbed Julian's shoulder and violently yanked the massive Alpha backward, throwing him off balance, so he collapsed onto the mattress, out of the line of fire. In the same fluid motion, I kicked the cleaning cart. The aluminum mop handle popped up into the air. I caught it seamlessly in my right hand, my fingers wrapping around the cold metal with the familiarity of an old friend. The mercenaries blinked, confused by the sudden blur of motion. That hesitation was all I needed. The ghost woke up. I closed the distance between me and the lead mercenary in less than a second. I did not swing the mop handle like a club. I thrust it forward like a spear. The blunt aluminum tip struck him directly in the larynx with bone-crushing force. He dropped without a single sound, his airway completely collapsed. The second man raised his gun. I ducked under his line of sight, sweeping the aluminum pole hard against the side of his knee. The joint snapped backward with a sickening crunching noise. As he fell, I spun the pole upward, catching him under the chin, snapping his jaw shut, and sending him crashing into the wall. "What the third man shouted, opening fire. I was already moving. I used the falling body of the second man as a shield, the suppressed bullets thudding harmlessly into Kevlar. I vaulted over the body, planting my bare foot squarely into the third man's chest, driving the end of the mop handle deep into his solar plexus. The air rushed from his lungs in a violent wheeze. I brought the metal pole down on the back of his neck, and he collapsed like a puppet with cut strings. The last 2 men panicked. They dropped their professional discipline and rushed me with tactical knives. I sidestepped the first blade, catching the man's wrist with my free hand. I twisted his arm until the shoulder popped out of its socket, then drove the butt of the aluminum pole into his temple. He went down instantly. The final mercenary lunged his blade, slicing a thin, stinging line across my cheek. My black coffee scent spiked not in fear, but in pure, unadulterated apex aggression. I parried his next strike with the center of the pole, stepped inside his guard, and drove my elbow into his face. Blood exploded from his nose, splattering across the pristine white wool rug beneath our feet. I froze, looking down at the red stains rapidly blooming on the imported fabric. A surge of genuine domestic irritation pierced through my assassin's calm. I grabbed the staggering mercenary by the collar of his tactical vest, glaring into his terrified eyes. "Do you have any idea?" I hissed, my voice dripping with venomous, psychotic calm, how insanely difficult it is to get arterial blood out of a pure wool Persian rug. I did not wait for his answer. I slammed the side of the mop handle against his temple. His eyes rolled back, and he hit the floor dead weight. Silence slammed back into the room. It had taken exactly 11 seconds. 5 elite mercenaries were scattered across the floor, groaning or completely unconscious. I stood in the center of the carnage, my chest rising and falling in slow, controlled breaths. The aluminum mop handle in my hand was slightly bent from the force of the impacts. A single drop of blood trickled down my cheek from the shallow knife wound. Slowly, the adrenaline faded, and the terrifying reality of what I had just done washed over me. I turned around. Julian was sitting on the edge of the mattress. The fever was still burning in his veins, his chest heaving, but the physical pain seemed entirely erased by absolute paralyzed shock. His dark eyes were blown wide open, fixed on me. He looked at the bodies on the floor, then at the bent mop handle in my hand, and finally up to my cold, calculating eyes. The fragile, terrified Omega he had sworn to protect with his life was gone. Standing in front of him was the ghost of the Blackwood Syndicate. The mop handle slipped from my fingers, clattering loudly against the hardwood floor. Julian did not speak. He did not reach for me. He just stared, the silence stretching between us, like a tightened wire ready to snap and decapitate us both. My biggest secret was laid bare under the moonlight. The act was over. The clatter of the bent aluminum mop handle hitting the floor sounded like a judge's gavel in the ruined bedroom. I did not look at Julian. I could not. For 3 weeks, I had built a meticulous fortress of lies around myself, painting the perfect portrait of a fragile, broken Omega who needed a strong alpha to survive. In exactly 11 seconds, I had burned that portrait to ash. I turned my back on the bleeding mercenaries and walked straight to the walk-in closet. My movements were sharp, mechanical, entirely devoid of the clumsy hesitation I had feigned for so long. "Hush, Toby," I whispered, pulling the heavy cashmere coats aside. The little boy was curled into a tight ball, his hands clamped over his ears, his eyes squeezed shut, just as I had instructed. I scooped him up, pressing his face into my shoulder so he would not see the carnage on the Persian rug as we left the room. I grabbed the canvas duffel bag I always kept packed under the floorboards of the closet, a paranoid habit you never truly lose when your head has a bounty on it. I threw in Toby's medication, a few changes of clothes, and the stuffed bear Julian's men had bought. I knew how the Mafia worked. I knew how the Iron Alpha worked. Deception was a capital offense. I was not just a liar, I was the ghost. I was the top executioner for the Blackwood Syndicate, the very people who had spent the last decade trying to dismantle Julian's empire. It did not matter that I had just saved his life. In his eyes, I was a sleeper agent, a threat, a monster who had infiltrated his home and manipulated his instincts. I carried the bag and Toby into the adjoining master bathroom, gently setting the sleepy toddler down in the massive, dry marble bathtub where he could not wander. "Stay right here, baby. We are going on a trip," I murmured. Then I looked at myself in the mirror over the double vanity. My face was pale, a thin cut weeping blood down my cheek from the mercenary's knife, but it was my hands that made my breath hitch in my throat. They were stained. The mercenary's blood had splattered across my knuckles, seeping into the faded white scars I had lied to Julian about just days ago. The metallic smell hit the back of my throat, and suddenly I was not in a luxury penthouse in Manhattan anymore. I was back in that damp basement in Brooklyn. I was back in the rainy alleyways of Vienna. I was standing over a crib with a suppressed pistol in my hand, staring at a crying infant. Panic, cold, and absolute gripped my chest. I dropped the duffel bag and lunged for the sink. I cranked the heavy silver faucet, letting the freezing water blast over my hands. I pumped a massive handful of harsh antibacterial liquid soap onto my palms and grabbed a stiff, bristled nail brush from the counter. Press, circle, swipe, breathe. I scrubbed violently. The stiff bristles dug into my skin, turning the water pink, then red. But it was not enough. The blood was gone, but I could still feel it. I could still feel the phantom weight of all the lives I had taken, the widows I had made, the children I had orphaned before Toby. I had tried so hard to wash it away. I had traded my tactical gear for a hospital apron. I had traded my sniper rifles for a mop. I had tried to be soft, to be normal, to be worthy of the gentle way Julian had kissed me in the kitchen. But I was not. I was a killer. I would always be a killer. My breathing turned into ragged, desperate gasps. My black coffee pheromones flooded the bathroom, but there was no dominance or aggression in them now. Only a toxic, suffocating wave of self-hatred and pure psychological distress. I scrubbed harder, tearing the first layer of skin from my knuckles, desperate to flay the ghost right off my bones. "Asher." The voice was a low, heavy rumble that vibrated through the marble floor. I did not stop. I could not. "I have to get it off." I choked out my voice, cracking entirely. "I have to get it clean. We are leaving. I will take Toby and we will disappear. I swear I will not ever come near your territory again, Julian. Just let me get clean first." Heavy, uneven footsteps crossed the bathroom threshold. I braced myself for the cold press of a gun barrel against the back of my head. I prepared my muscles to react to fight my way out of the penthouse against the man I had just saved. But the gun never came. Instead, two massive, fever-warm hands reached directly into the freezing water. Julian did not grab my wrists to restrain me with alpha force. He simply placed his large palms entirely over my bleeding hands, effectively shielding my raw skin from the brutal bristles of the brush. I froze the nail brush slipping from my numb fingers to clatter against the porcelain sink. Julian reached up and twisted the silver faucet, shutting off the rushing water. The sudden silence in the bathroom was deafening, broken only by my ragged breathing and the faint dripping of the tap. He stood right behind me, his broad chest pressing lightly against my shaking back. I closed my eyes, waiting for the anger, the betrayal, the alpha command demanding answers. But his winter frost pheromones did not spike with rage. They rolled over me, gentle and encompassing, weaving through my distressed coffee scent like a heavy protective blanket, neutralizing my panic on a molecular level. Slowly, carefully, he turned me around to face him. Julian looked terrible. His skin was pale from the fever, his dark hair damp with sweat, and he was leaning heavily against the marble counter just to stay upright. But his dark eyes were incredibly clear. He looked down at my raw, bleeding hands, the water dripping from my torn skin onto the pristine floor. He lifted my hands just as he had done in the hallway nights ago. He did not ask if I was a Blackwood assassin. He did not ask how many men I had killed. He just looked at the damage I had done to myself trying to run away from my own shadow. "You are clean enough," Julian whispered, his voice thick with a raw, agonizing sorrow. "Stop scrubbing Asher, please. You are already clean enough." A choked sob tore itself from my throat. My knees finally buckled under the weight of the adrenaline and the guilt. Julian caught me immediately, pulling me flush against his chest, burying his face in the crook of my neck. "I lied to you." I cried, my hands hovering uselessly in the air, afraid to stain his shirt with my blood. "I lied about everything. I'm a monster, Julian. I am the ghost." "I know who the ghost is." Julian murmured into my skin, his arms tightening around me like steel bands anchoring me to reality. "And I do not care. Do you hear me? I do not care." I shook my head frantically against his shoulder. "You do not understand. I was going to leave. I was going to run because I thought you would kill me." Julian pulled back just enough to look me in the eyes. His hands came up to cup my face, his thumbs gently wiping away the mixture of tears and blood on my cheek. There was no fear in his gaze. There was no betrayal. There was only a profound, earth-shattering realization. "I spent the last 2 weeks treating you like glass," Julian said, his voice dropping into a fierce, absolute vow. "I thought I needed to shield you from the darkness of my world. I did not realize you had already walked through hell and survived it all on your own." He leaned his forehead against mine, his breathing sinking with my uneven gasps. The Iron Alpha was not looking down at a fragile Omega anymore. He was looking at an equal. He was looking at a partner. "I told you I was going to kill anyone who ever made you hold a mop in fear." Julian breathed, his dark eyes flashing with a lethal, beautiful promise. "I meant it, but now I think we are going to have to kill them together." The last lingering shard of fear inside my chest shattered into dust. I looked at the man who ruled New York's underworld, the man who had just accepted my blood-soaked past without a single second of hesitation. I did not need to hide anymore. I did not need to be a ghost, and I did not need to be a helpless cleaner. I could just be his. "Yeah," I whispered, finally wrapping my bleeding hands tightly into the fabric of his shirt. "We are going to kill them all." The Brooklyn Navy Yard at 2 o'clock in the morning smelled of saltwater rusting iron and desperate ambitions. Heavy, freezing rain lashed against the cracked pavement in relentless sheets, washing away the surface grime of the city, but doing absolutely nothing to cleanse the sins waiting inside Warehouse 4B. Marcus Kane had taken 3 of Julian's highest-ranking lieutenants hostage. He had rigged the perimeter station elite sharpshooters in the rusted catwalks and sent a broadcast to the entire New York underworld. It was a classic, desperate Mafia bait and trap. He wanted the weakened Iron Alpha to walk blindly into a crossfire, hoping to publicly execute the king and take the throne. What Marcus did not know was that the Iron Alpha was not walking into the dark alone. He was bringing a ghost. I crouched on the rusted steel beams of the warehouse roof, the freezing rain slicking my matte black tactical gear. The baggy blue hospital scrubs were gone. The terrified fragile Omega Act had been burned to ash in the penthouse. The heavy, comforting weight of twin suppressed Sig Sauers rested against my thighs, and a carbon steel karambit blade was sheathed at my chest. For the first time in a year and a half, I was not running from what I was weaponizing it. Down below, the heavy corrugated metal doors of the warehouse shrieked as they were violently torn off their tracks. Julian Thorne walked into the trap. He did not sneak. He did not hide. He stepped into the cavernous, dimly lit warehouse with the terrifying, unbothered grace of an apex predator. He wore a dark wool overcoat that billowed slightly in the storm's crosswind. Instantly, his iron alpha pheromones exploded into the enclosed space. It was not the fractured, feverish scent from the penthouse. This was a concentrated, lethal winter storm, a suffocating blizzard of absolute dominance that made the air physically drop in temperature. Julian! Marcus's voice echoed through the warehouse, amplified by a megaphone from the safety of a fortified glass office on the second-floor mezzanine. I did not think you would actually show up. And you came alone. Where is your pathetic little Omega? Did you finally realize a cleaner cannot save a dying empire? Julian stopped in the dead center of the floor, surrounded by at least 20 heavily armed mercenaries emerging from behind wooden shipping crates. The 3 battered lieutenants were tied to structural pillars behind them. Julian slowly looked up toward Marcus's office. He did not look angry. He looked profoundly, genuinely amused. I am not here to save my empire. Marcus. Julian's deep voice carried effortlessly over the pounding rain. I am just here to act as the distraction. Marcus frowned. Distraction for who? Press, circle, swipe, breathe. I dropped through the shattered skylight like a shadow detached from the night sky. I did not make a sound as my boots hit the first catwalk. The rhythm of cleaning is no different from the rhythm of killing. It is simply a matter of identifying the mess and systematically erasing it. The first sniper did not even have time to blink. I wrapped my arm around his throat, applying precise pressure to the carotid artery. He was unconscious in 3 seconds. I lowered his body silently to the grating, took his radio, and clicked the transmitter twice. Down below, the firefight erupted. Julian moved with brutal, breathtaking efficiency. He was the anvil, drawing every eye, every bullet, and every ounce of fear in the room. He flipped a massive wooden crate with one hand to absorb the initial volley of bullets, returning fire with a heavy-caliber handgun. His winter frost pheromones were so oppressive that half of Marcus's men were visibly shaking their aim, wild and undisciplined. While they were looking at the roaring alpha on the ground, I was sweeping the high ground. I vaulted over a rusted pipe, drawing my suppressed pistol. 2 sharp exhales of compressed air echoed quietly, and the second and third snipers dropped their rifles, falling limply against the railings. I moved effortlessly along the beams, a phantom in the peripheral vision of the dying. Every time a mercenary on the ground tried to flank Julian, a silent bullet from the rafters found the weak point in their Kevlar. Snipers! Take him out! Fire! Marcus screamed into the megaphone, his voice cracking with sudden panic as his men on the ground began dropping like flies from invisible angles. Where is the covering fire? He got no answer. The high ground was completely spotlessly clean. Down below, Julian shattered the kneecap of the last remaining ground guard, leaving the warehouse floor a graveyard of groaning, incapacitated men. He casually reloaded his weapon, his dark eyes fixing on the glass office above. Marcus stepped out onto the mezzanine balcony, trembling violently. He raised a submachine gun, aiming wildly at Julian. You are dead. You are both dead. I will burn this whole city to find that little hospital rat you love so much, and I will end him. I really would not finish that sentence. My voice was quiet, calm, and directly right behind his left ear. Marcus froze. The blood drained entirely from his face. He slowly turned his head, his eyes widening in absolute unfiltered horror as he took in my matte black tactical gear, the cold emptiness in my eyes, and the dripping karambit blade resting casually against his jugular vein. You! Marcus choked out his weapon, trembling in his hands. He recognized the tactical setup. He recognized the dead, emotionless eyes. Every criminal in the underworld knew the legends of the Blackwood's top executioner. You are the ghost, but you are dead. I took some time off. I whispered my bitter black coffee pheromones, flaring, cutting through the air with apex aggression. I do laundry now. And, unfortunately for you, my alpha hates messes." I kicked the back of his knee, forcing him to collapse onto the grating. Before he could raise his gun, I drove the hilt of my blade into his temple. Marcus Kane hit the steel floor out cold. The warehouse fell deathly silent, save for the rain drumming against the tin roof and the distant wail of police sirens. I holstered my weapons and lightly vaulted over the mezzanine railing, dropping 20 feet and landing in a smooth crouch on the concrete floor next to Julian. The adrenaline was beginning to crash. My chest heaved, and the cold reality of the slaughter around me started to seep into my bones. I looked at my gloved hands, half expecting the old suffocating panic to return. But it did not. Julian stepped forward. His dark overcoat was torn, a shallow graze bleeding on his cheekbone, but his eyes were entirely focused on me. The terrifying, suffocating blizzard of his pheromones instantly melted the moment he stepped into my space. The winter frost wrapped around my bitter black coffee scent, intertwining perfectly, creating a warm, grounding anchor that tethered my soul back to the earth. He did not see a monster, he just saw me. Julian reached out his large, warm hands, gently gripping my jaw. He tilted my head up, his thumb brushing over my cheek. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice a low, rough rumble. "No." I breathed, my eyes fluttering shut as I leaned into his touch. "Are you?" "Never better," he murmured. We stood there in the middle of a ruined warehouse, surrounded by the remnants of a shattered empire, and for the first time in my entire life, I felt completely, utterly safe. There were no lies between us anymore. No aprons, no fake smiles, no hidden weapons. Just two men who had walked through hell and found each other in the ashes. Julian's gaze dropped to my lips, then slowly moved to the sensitive expanse of my neck. His breathing hitched. The desire in his eyes was not just physical. It was a desperate soul, deep need to anchor himself to me forever. "Asher," he whispered, his voice trembling with the weight of the question. I did not hesitate. I tilted my head to the side, bearing my scent gland to him. "Yes, please." Julian pulled me flush against his chest. He buried his face in the crook of my neck, inhaling the deep, dark scent of my pheromones. And then he bit down. It was not a bite of dominance. It was not an alpha claiming his property. It was a blood pact. It was a vow pressed into my skin, a promise that we would carry each other's sins, share each other's burdens, and protect our small, broken family against the rest of the world. A sharp, brilliant flare of pain echoed through my nervous system, instantly followed by a rush of pure, intoxicating warmth. His winter frost flooded my veins, calming the darkest corners of my mind, telling my fractured instincts that the war was finally over. I gasped, wrapping my arms tightly around his broad shoulders, clinging to him as the permanent bond cemented us together. When he finally pulled back, he rested his forehead against mine, both of us breathing heavily in the quiet aftermath. He looked down at me, a soft, rare smile breaking through the harsh lines of his face. I smiled back, my heartbeat finally steady. I reached up, using my thumb to wipe a smear of Marcus's blood off the lapel of Julian's ruined designer overcoat. "Just so you know," I whispered, my eyes crinkling with quiet amusement. "Washing this jacket is going to cost you extra, boss." Rumors spread through the New York underworld faster than a bloodstain on white silk. In the 3 months following the massacre at the Brooklyn Navy Yard, the Thorn Syndicate underwent a brutal, sweeping restructuring. With Marcus Kane gone and his loyalists completely eradicated, Julian solidified his grip on the city's criminal empire. The Iron Alpha was more ruthless, more unyielding, and more terrifying than ever before. But alongside the hushed whispers of his violent resurgence, a new, far stranger legend began to circulate among the city's most hardened criminals. The legend of the Phantom Omega. It was said that Julian Thorn had a shadow, an Omega who smelled of bitter black coffee and possessed the lethality of a ghost. The underworld learned very quickly that you could disrespect Julian Thorn and perhaps survive with a broken jaw, but if you disrespected his Omega, you simply vanished. More importantly, the Syndicate's top lieutenants learned the absolute unbreakable golden rule of the new regime. You do not, under any circumstances, track mud onto the penthouse floors. Right foot, left foot. Use the bristled mat, Victor, or I swear to God I will mop the floor with your tailored Italian suit. I stood in the foyer of the penthouse, my arms crossed over the chest of my oversized gray sweater, holding a steaming mug of black coffee. Victor, a 6'4" enforcer with a rap sheet longer than a pharmacy receipt, froze mid-step. He looked down at his designer leather shoes, then looked up at me with genuine wide-eyed terror. "Sorry, Asher," Victor mumbled, frantically scraping the soles of his shoes against the heavy-duty welcome mat I had installed outside the private elevator. "It is raining out there. I did not mean to upset you." "I know it is raining, Victor. That is why I left the shoe covers in the basket." I pointed a stern finger at a woven basket filled with blue plastic surgical shoe covers. "Put them on. Then you can take the supply route reports to Julian." The massive, heavily tattooed Mafia enforcer obediently bent down, slipped the embarrassing blue plastic covers over his expensive shoes, and shuffled awkwardly past me. He did not dare complain. He had been at the warehouse in Brooklyn. He had seen what I could do with an aluminum pole. I took a slow sip of my coffee, a soft, genuine smile touching my lips as I watched him walk away. The penthouse smelled of lemon polish, fresh rain, and the deep, comforting chill of Julian's winter frost. It was a Tuesday evening. The city lights of Manhattan glittered through the floor-to-ceiling windows, a vast ocean of organized chaos that felt miles away from the quiet sanctuary we had built in the sky. I padded softly into the sprawling living room. Julian was sitting at the massive mahogany desk near the corner, the soft amber glow of a reading lamp illuminating the sharp, tired lines of his jaw. He was reviewing the very supply reports Victor had just dropped off, his dark brow furrowed in concentration. Even now, dressed in a simple black t-shirt and loose sweatpants, he looked dangerously powerful. But the air around him was not suffocating anymore. His pheromones were calm, steady, reaching out across the room to intertwine with my coffee scent the moment I entered. On the thick, pristine wool Persian rug, the same rug I had nearly murdered a mercenary over for bleeding on Toby, was lying on his stomach, completely absorbed in a scattering of crayons and construction paper. I crouched down next to the little boy, resting my hand gently on his soft hair. "What are we working on, buddy?" Toby looked up, a smudge of blue crayon on his cheek, and beamed. "It is us," he announced proudly, holding up a piece of paper. I looked at the drawing. It was a chaotic mess of stick figures and crooked lines, but the details were unmistakably clear. There was a very large stick figure radiating blue scribbles, holding what was undeniably a handgun. Standing right next to him was a slightly smaller stick figure surrounded by brown scribbles, holding a long silver stick with a gray sponge at the end. Between them, holding both their hands, was a tiny stick figure wearing a red cape. "Two superheroes," Toby explained seriously. "One shoots the bad guys, and the other one cleans up the mess so we do not get in trouble." A sudden deep chuckle rumbled through the room. I looked up. Julian had turned away from his paperwork and was watching us, his dark eyes crinkling at the corners with unfiltered warmth. He stood from the desk and walked over, lowering his massive frame to sit cross-legged on the rug beside us. "That is a very accurate drawing, Toby," Julian said, his voice a low, affectionate rumble. He reached out and tapped the paper. "But you forgot the most important part. The superhero with the mop is the one in charge." I scoffed lightly, bumping my shoulder against his. "Do not tell him that. It will ruin my mysterious, intimidating reputation." Julian wrapped a heavy arm around my waist, pulling me effortlessly against his side. I did not resist. I leaned my head against his broad shoulder, the permanent bite mark on my scent gland tingling warmly at the physical contact. I did not have to wear high-collared shirts to hide it. I wore it like a badge of honor. Toby yawned, rubbing his eyes with small fists. "I am sleepy," he mumbled, abandoning the crayons. "Come here, little menace," Julian murmured. He scooped the toddler up into his arms, resting Toby's head against his chest. Within seconds, the steady, rhythmic heartbeat of the Iron Alpha lulled the boy to sleep. Julian looked down at the sleeping child, a profound, quiet awe in his expression. Then he turned his head, pressing a lingering, tender kiss into my hair. "Thank you," Julian whispered into the quiet room. "For what?" I asked, looking up at him. "For not running away that night," he replied, his thumb gently tracing the faded white scars on my knuckles. "For letting me see the ghost. For letting me be your family." My chest tightened with a surge of emotion so deep it almost ached. The world outside these glass walls was brutal. Julian and I were both monsters in the eyes of the law, painted in shades of violence and blood. We had both built our survival on secrets and fear. But love, I had finally learned, was not about finding someone who was perfectly innocent. It was not about a strong alpha shielding a fragile omega from the dark. Love was finding someone who knew exactly how dark your soul was, who looked at your blood-stained hands and decided they were the exact hands he wanted to hold for the rest of his life. It was two scarred, dangerous people taking off their heavy armor at the front door, slipping on cheap blue shoe covers, and fiercely protecting the quiet, fragile piece of their home together. I reached up, cupping Julian's rough jaw, and pulled him down for a slow, lingering kiss. It tasted of black coffee, winter frost, and absolute certainty. "You are welcome, boss," I murmured against his lips. "Just remember to wipe your feet."